You're tuned in to the Grace Code podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and this is a show all about unlocking Jesus in the everyday. What's the everyday? Well, it's things like your faith, career, relationships, health, and so much more. I pray that this podcast leaves you inspired and passionate to find Jesus as you go about your everyday, and that it encourages you to step out of your comfort zone and into the things that God is calling you to. Well, hello friend, and welcome back to another episode of the Grace Code podcast. If you didn't know already, I'm your host Lisa, and this is a show all about unlocking Jesus in your everyday. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now, once again, I would be so honored if you could take a quick minute and go and review the Grace Code podcast on whatever podcasting platform you listen to it on, as it does help grow the show and share the good news of Jesus to more people. Now, I have got a great episode for you today, which rides off the back of last week's episode. So if you missed part 1, I'd love for you to go and give it a quick listen, because it does build a bit on what we're going to talk about today. So in last week's episode, I shared about how I was pretty close to burning out more than once, as well as some practical ways in which you can take back control of your schedule when you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed. I really want to point out the fact that God can't heal what we don't confront. But in order for him to heal those areas, we need to surrender them over to him. And that is so important. And this leads me into today's episode. While last week focused on the practical, today we're going to focus on your heart. As you've probably guessed already, I'm a person that likes to do things. I am a doer. I can sit at my computer for hours when I'm working on or I'm in the writing zone. And even at night, I find myself doing something. It might not be intense, but something else always has my attention. And so I might be resting by watching something on TV, but I have my iPad in hand drawing in Procreate. And that's not the healthiest of behaviors. And I really only notice this occurring the longer I've been in lockdown for. I just don't have the focus that I used to have, and I really don't want that to start to stem into other areas of my life, which is why I found it so helpful to plan and schedule my days and weeks like I do. So again, refer back to last week's episode if you have no idea what I am talking about. And, while I definitely carve out time for the things that I value most in life, and I'm stewarding the areas that God has given me well, I think I can often at times forget to set aside time to properly refuel and rest. Art and writing used to be a part of the time I would use to refuel. And as much as I still absolutely love creating and have a passion for it, it's now intertwined in my work. And, I find that sometimes I can put the pressure on myself to create, and I no longer create for the fun of creating, if that makes sense. So while having all the plans and to-do lists and making the time to specifically write and create things for the Grace Code is great, and it's amazing, and I absolutely love it, and I'm so honored that I get to do it, I need to remind myself to set time aside to just create things for Jesus. Like, there's no purpose in it other than giving it to God. And it's okay to have those moments and times too. And that's what I want to look at today. Last week I went through actionable steps to help you tackle your to-do list, because that is something that so many people can actually struggle with. And it's really overwhelming when you have so many tasks to complete. But all the plans and all the lists and making all the goals and seeing them accomplished, yes, it is wonderful. But that should be all secondary to what the most important thing is in life. And that's spending time with Jesus. Sitting there and resting in his presence should be what we are truly pursuing in life. It's what we're called to do before everything and anything else. And to be completely honest with you, I'm absolutely guilty of putting my to-do list before my quiet times. And I think it's because, we get into this panic thinking, what is going to happen if I don't get everything on that list done today? But I want to ask you, what can God do with that to-do list if we put him first on it? And the times that I have put him first, he has come through and he has given me the wisdom to sort out my priorities, and he's given me the ideas and everything else to help see that list completed much quicker than I could have done in my own strength. I think sometimes we can miss Jesus in those practical moments of our day because we're so busy doing all the things that we think are serving him, when really he's calling us to just to be with him, just to sit at his feet, just to hand it all over to him. When was the last time in the middle of your day, in the middle of your overwhelm, you stopped and surrendered it all over to God? I'm reminded of the beautiful story of Mary and Martha. Now, I don't know about you, but I definitely have a little bit of Mary and a little bit of Martha in me. And if I'm really honest, I probably sway a little bit more to the Martha side more times than I should, because I am a doer. But the really beautiful thing is that they both represent you and me in different ways. We all know this story really well. Mary and Martha were ready to host Jesus on their terms. They knew that he was coming and were going to prepare a meal for him according to their schedule. Next minute, Jesus suddenly arrives. What do you do when Jesus suddenly arrives in the middle of your day? There he was, ready to come into their house, and these two sisters were so overwhelmed because nothing had been prepared. So we have Martha, the doer, frantically trying to put together the best meal she could make for Jesus because she loved him so much. She wanted to make sure he had the absolute best of everything. Then we have Mary, who doesn't lift a finger to help her at all. And I feel a little for Martha in this moment, because here she is. She thinks she's doing the right thing. There's work to be done, and she feels obligated to do it, because if she doesn't do it, who is going to do it? She has this idea that it's not going to get done at all unless she is the one to do it. And if you've been in that situation before, when, say, you're the one doing all the housework, what would your reaction be? Martha is no different. She gets to this point where she's had enough and she lets her sister have it. She goes straight to Jesus and lets out her frustration in that moment to him. And many of us might think that Jesus would say something like, you know what? Yeah, you're right, Martha. She should be helping you out. But instead, he turns to her, and in Luke 10, verse 41 to 42, he says, Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. That was the NIV version, but I want to flip over to the ESV, which says, but the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Don't you just love that moment? Here, Jesus is saying that Mary chose the good portion. She's chosen the better thing, the only thing that was needed in that moment, and he wasn't going to take that away from her by telling her to get back into the kitchen, so to speak. What Martha was doing was good. In fact, it was great. But in that very moment of time, was it actually necessary? Could she have stopped for a moment and, like Mary, sat at the feet of Jesus and soaked up that moment and the very fact that the King of Kings, the Savior of the world, was right there in her house? I said this before, but sometimes we miss Jesus showing up in the middle of our day because we are so focused on our to-do lists, even if those to-do lists are filled with things that are serving him. But in reality, all he wants is for us to sit and soak in his presence and rest with him. Nothing is more important than waiting and resting in the presence of God. No to-do list, no ministry, no business, nothing. So when he suddenly shows up in your day, are you prepared to put everything down and sit at his feet? The highest act of service we can do for God is to wait on him, to be with him, and to rest in his presence, to hand all of our burdens over to him and let him direct our paths. When we keep going and going and going and don't stop to find rest in God's presence, that's what leads to overwhelm. That's what's going to lead us to burnout. If we are so busy that we don't have time to stop and hear from God, we're going to end up stuck. We're going to end up lost. We're going to end up parched. We are going to end up so overwhelmed and overcommitted that no method of scheduling your tasks is going to help you. If you're empty, you are not going to be able to pour into anyone else. So if you are overwhelmed and overcommitted, prioritize rest today. Prioritize resting in your Savior's presence. It's where all good things are hidden. So I have some quick and simple ways you can learn to prioritize rest. Number 1, no matter what lies ahead of you in your day, make spending time with Jesus your number 1 priority. Number 2, give any anxiety, stress, and overwhelm over to Jesus. Number 3, learn to say no so that you can make room for the things that you value most in life. Number 4, learn to rest intentionally. So schedule that time into your day where you just take a moment to be with Jesus, or you take a moment to do something that's going to refuel you. Number 5, implement the actionable steps I mentioned in last week's episode to help you get on top of everything and slot in breaks during your workday. Well, we have come to the end of another episode of the Grace Code podcast. I hope this series, Overwhelmed and Overcommitted, has helped you in some way. As always, please feel free to reach out to me if you want to chat more. But thank you once again for joining me this week. Don't forget to share this episode with a friend, leave a review, and come and say hi to me over on Instagram at that.gracecode. Until next Friday, have a beautifully blessed week. Thanks so much for joining me this week on the Grace Code podcast. This show is made possible because of listeners like you. If you want to find out more about the Grace Code, head over to my Instagram at that.gracecode and say hello. If you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss an episode, and be sure to join me next Friday. Until then, have a beautifully blessed week.